So we can start.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So today I have elected to put 4 subjects here, and let me just state them. The first one is modesty, all in the light of Quran, by the way, of course. Second is marriage to more than one woman. Number 3 is beating one's wife. And number 4 is the expressions Fahishaa and Zinna. Now you can very quickly gauge that these are topics in which
Billy?
hello. These are all topics that pertain to what is clear over here. There is an involvement in these subjects of the women's side. There are no women here. We are all men here. So we should be sensitive to that. Also, the subject matter here requires use of words that are supposed to be understood in the spirit in which they are being put out here. This is an adult talk, and therefore we should be sensitive to the sensitivity, if you will, of the subject matter, okay? That being said, let me just move on. So now, modesty as per the Quran is really having to do with lowering one's gaze. The gaze is normally an intent look, or eyes, if you would put it. Lowering one gaze, being mindful of one's chastity. Chastity really is virtuosity. How do you mind your virtue? And with respect to women, in addition, display of women's charms in public. So these are the 4 items that appear, 3 items that appear when modesty is concerned with reference to the Quranic verse. Again, lowering one's gaze, mindful of one's chastity, that is, mindful of one's virtuosity when in public, and for women, in addition, display of women's charms in public. So now the reference is to the verse 30 in part of Surah Al-Nur. Tell the believing men to lower their gaze and to be mindful of their chastity, that is purer for them. I'll repeat again. Tell the believing men to lower their gaze and to be mindful of their chastity, that is purer for them. Now this phrase, mindful of their chastity, actually the literal translation of it, of the words is, guard their private parts. Yahfazu furujuhum. So, literal translation here of this particular phrase is, guard their private parts. In this translation, which is Muhammad Asad, he has elected to put instead of that, mindful of their chastity in its stead. Clearly, there is more than one reason why he has done that, and we may move on and unpack it a little bit. Now, the phrase guard their private parts here for men, and in the next verse, it'll be for women, may be understood in 2 ways. One, in the literal sense of covering one's private parts, which is what Yahfazu furujahum usually is translated. And if you were to broaden that, because it's pretty stark, if you were to broaden that, what does the message want to say? It is to have modesty in one's dress. To be modest in public, while you are in public, what you dress up, you men dress up, let there be modesty in it, okay? In addition to that, that is, in addition to literal translation covering one's part, but broadening in your mind to say what it means really is to be modest in how you appear insofar as your clothing goes. In addition to it, it is also in the sense of restraining one's sexual urges. Now, what is that? If you are not modest in your dress, it is also going to reflect upon you that you're trying to demonstrate that you have the sexual urges. Here, when it says guard their private parts in metaphorical terms, not in literal terms, but metaphorical terms, it is asking you to restrain the urges that are biologically in you only to what is lawful, namely marital intercourse. So, a very stark phrase, guard your private parts, is supposed to really mean be modest in your dressing and restrain while you are in public the sexual urges that are lawful only to the marital intercourse. Now, the rendering mindful of chastity, be mindful of your virtue, allows for both these interpretations. If instead of literally saying guide your private parts, if you were to say be mindful of your virtue, then it incorporates the fact that dress modestly and while you are in public, may realize to yourself that any urge that anything out there may provoke should be restricted insofar as physical relationship is concerned to your lawful married wife. Is that clear? I mean, this is how the interpretation is supposed to go. Now, in the following verse, as you will see, and tell the believing women to lower their gaze and be mindful of their chastity. That is, guard their private parts in literal. Now, see, this is exactly the same for women as it was for men. Or put it another way, for men, it is exactly the same injunction in the Quran as it is for women. Exactly the same words. Of course, the feminine words are going to be used, and to not display their charms. Now we're going into more about what women's are being said. So, and tell the believing women to lower their gaze and be mindful of their chastity, be mindful of their virtuosity, and not to display their charms, in Arabic, zinatahunna, in public beyond what may decently be apparent thereof. I'll repeat it because I'm going to unpack this. Not to display their charms beyond what may, and I'm putting it parenthetically, decently be apparent thereof. That means of their charms. Hence, let them draw their head coverings, khumur, over their bosoms, breasts, and let them not swing their legs while walking, walking with a swag, as it were, so as to draw attention to their charms. Let them not swing their legs so as to draw attention to their charms. What is the literal translation? Let them not swing their legs so that those of their charms which they keep hidden may become known. These are very subtle words, okay? I'm going to go through this again and then we will unpack it. And tell the women to lower their gaze and be mindful of their chastity and not to display their charm beyond what may decently be apparent of those charms. Hence, let them draw their head coverings over their breasts and let them not swing their legs so as to draw attention to their charms. Okay. The phrase illa ma zahara minha, which is, now if you'll see, go back to that ayat up there, and I have rendered bold what may decently be apparent thereof. This in Arabic is illa ma zahara minha. Now, this phrase is ambiguous in Arabic language. The scholars of Arabic language over the centuries have agreed that illa ma zahara minha is ambiguous in Arabic. That is, they've reached the conclusion that this particular phrase has deliberately been left ambiguous in Arabic. In other words, it is subject to more than one interpretation, and you should be careful about it. How this particular translation has been done is, it says, illa ma zahara minha is what may decently be apparent thereof, whatever charms there are. Okay. The interpolation of the word decently, which Muhammad Asad has done here, the interpolation of the word decently reflects interpretation of this phrase, illa ma zahara minha, by several of the earliest scholars as that which a human being may openly show in accordance with the prevailing custom. They figured that if you were to put decently in it, interpolate in it, it would be interpreted as that which a human being may openly show in accordance with prevailing custom. Now, although the traditional exponents of Islamic law have for centuries been inclined to restrict definition of what may decently be apparent to mean a woman's face, hands, and feet, and sometimes even less than that, one may safely assume that the meaning of the above phrase is much wider, and that the deliberate vagueness of this phrase, ambiguity, is meant to allow for all the time-bound changes that are necessary for man's moral and social growth. What do I mean by that? When you keep this phrase deliberately vague and translate it as what may decently be apparent, and what was interpreted of it 1,000 years ago, what was interpreted for it 100 years ago, what is being interpreted here today, it should reflect today's reality. In that reality, how am I, a Muslim man, going to realize what is necessary for my moral and social growth today? In other words, is my morality in 2025 and is my social relationship within my society, does that allow for me to go beyond that? How am I supposed to understand what does my conscience say about what may or what should decently be apparent insofar as the opposite sex is concerned in public? This is why this has been kept in this fashion, so that each phase in man's history, in a Muslim's history, takes into account that what really is important here is not to say this is how it was said 1400 years ago, but to incorporate my today's stance vis-a-vis my morality, my individual morality, and my my behavior in the social network. How do I incorporate this particular injunction of the Quran? Now, I'm putting these two ayat together. By the way, these two ayats, these are parts of these ayats which are germane to this particular subject. And I have made some of these things in bold, okay? So, the pivotal clause in these injunctions, verse 30 for men and verse 31 for women, is the demand which is addressed in identical terms to men as well as to women. What is that particular injunction? Lower your gaze and be mindful of your chastity, you men and women both. This is what determines the extent of what at any given time may legitimately, that is, in agreement with the Quranic principles of social morality, be considered decent or indecent in a person's outward appearance. You take this with you and you walk with that, no matter what time in history you're working with. A little bit more detail about the noun khimr, which is the plural of which is humur. It denotes the head covering that was customarily used by Arabian women before and after the advent of Islam. It was worn in pre-Islamic times more or less as an ornament and was let down loosely on a woman's back. And since, in accordance with the fashion prevalent at that time, the upper part of the woman's tunic had a wide opening in the front, her breasts were mostly left bare. Hence, the injunction here to cover them by means of khimar does not necessarily refer or relate to the use of khimar as such, but is rather meant to make it clear that a woman's breasts are not included in the concept of what may decently be apparent of her body and should not therefore be displayed. The purpose of that khimar, which used to be put in the back by way of fashion, is now being asked to cover the front portion, the front part of the female upper body. And it is not just that you're using your khimar in this way. No, it is that supposed to give you that the concept of what is decently apparent of her body should not be displayed. This is how one should take this conversation within this brief ayat about the covering. And the phrase, again, in the ayat above, I have rendered it bold, let them not swing their legs. In some translation, you will find, let them not stamp their legs. The phrase that is rendered by let them not swing their legs, la yadriba bi arjulihinna, that is the phrase, is idiomatically similar to the phrase he swung his arms while walking. You know, imagine the man, he swings his arms and he walks, and his gait is such that he says, look at me. In other words, he's pointing out, look at me, how sexually attractive I am. His gait, his walk is provocative, okay? When you say he swings his arms while walking, this is exactly in the same vein where it is being said for the women that they should let them not swing their legs. It alludes to a deliberately provocative gait. So again, tell the believing women to lower their gaze, be mindful of their chastity, not to display their charms in public beyond what may decently be apparent thereof. Hence, let them draw their head coverings over their breasts, and let them not swing their legs so as to draw attention to their charms. We should not make any more of this than what this is. We should not make any more of this than what it is. This is what defines modesty for specifically women in public. Now, what people have made of it, what is being attributed to various traditions, what has been said that only the eyes should be obvious, only the face and the hands should be obvious, I do not see any of it here. What you make of it, how you deal with it, it's up to you as an individual. It's up to you, the husband, telling the wife decided on her own, or harking back to he said, they said, this tradition, that tradition. I'm not going to go into it. I'm just saying this is what modesty in the Quran, as it's pointing out in Surah An-Nur, ayat 30 and 31, pertaining to men and women, is saying. And I'll end at that. The second issue of marriage to more than one woman. Surah An-Nisa, ayat 3. Surah An-Nisa, ayat 3. And if you have reason to fear that you might not act justly towards orphan, obviously it's meaning orphan girls, and if you have reason to fear that you might not act justly toward orphan girls, then marry among other women such as are good or that is lawful to you. even 2 or 3 or 4. But if you have reason to fear that you might not be able to treat them with equal fairness, then only 1, or from among those women who you are rightfully possessing. Okay, this will make it more likely that you will not deviate from the right course. There's a lot here to unpack, okay? So, in this particular ayat, there are several brackets, and there are several words that are rendered bold, okay? So, the bold words first. Marry women lawful to you or whom you rightfully possess. Marry women lawful to you or whom you rightfully possess. Keep this in mind. Next, when it says orphan, it implies orphan girls, clearly. From among women, other women is added here for a reason. Lawful to you is what is said, good for you is equally good, by way of translation. Even, that is, these women are lawful to you, and it can be even more than one. So even 2, 3, or 4. And then, but if it's not fair, then 1, then only 1. Okay. And whom you rightfully possess can literally be translated also as whom you are right hence possess. Yeah, there. Okay. So this is the ayat. Now, the phrase even 2, 3, or 4, but if you have reason to fear that you might not be able to treat them with equal fairness than only 1, has been now rendered in this exhibit bold and with underline in the ayah. Okay. Now, in the further explanation down here, I'm saying that this phrase is a parenthetic clause that relates, parenthetic clause meaning that it relates both to free women mentioned in the first part. What is the first part before this particular phrase? Then marry from other women, which is the free women, which are lawful to you. Those free women that are lawful to you, you can marry from among them. So this is even 2, 3, or 4 is a clause that relates to these free women, but which is mentioned in the first part of the sentence, but it also is pertaining to the female slaves, which is mentioned in the latter part, which is, or from among those whom you rightfully possess. And why do I say that? The word marry is a verb. You marry, I marry, she marries, he marries. The word marry is applicable to both the free women that are lawful to you and to female slaves. This particular clause that is in between, even 2 or 3 or 4, is applicable both to free women and to female slaves. It is not applicable just to the free women. You can marry 2, 3, or 4 free women and your female slave any number. This is how it's taken mostly. That you can marry among the women that are free out there, that are lawful to you, 2, 3, or 4, and then the female slaves that you have. No, this particular clause applies to the first part and the second part. Why? Because the verb marry, which is the injunction, which is what the injunction here is, the command here is applicable both kinds of women, free women as well as free slaves. So the 2, 3, or 4, you can have 2, 3, or 4 women total, from either among those that are lawful, from among female slaves, from this and that, but not 4 of these and innumerable of female slaves. This is not what it is. And so, if you are to translate it normally in English, this is the way it is structured in Arabic, because this is how it is structured in Arabic. But if you were to translate it in normal English, this would translate it as follows. marry from other women, such as are good or lawful to you, or from those whom you rightfully possess, even 2, 3, or 4. But if you have reason to fear that you might not be able to treat them with equal fairness, then only 1. I'm not discussing this latter part still. I'm still telling you that the injunction to marry a total of 4 is from both together, not from only lawful women to you, and then you can do whatever you want with female slaves, no matter how many number. No. This is the understanding by this translation, whether you take it linguistically or you take it when you think and reflect about it, what do you think is more? So that's how it is. Now, this then implies that irrespective of whether they are free women or originally slaves, the number of wives must not exceed 4. This view is also supported by Surah An-Nur, ayat 32, and you ought to marry the single from among you as well as such of your male and female slave as are fit for marriage, the single. Or by verse 25 of Surah An-Nisa. And as for those of you who, owing to circumstances, are not in a position to marry free believing women, let them marry believing women, maidens from among those who you rightfully possess. So in the context of this particular verse, those who you rightfully possess denotes women who were captured in a holy war and had subsequently embraced Islam. So these two references further reinforce that the total number of wives must not exceed 4, whether it's from free women or from slaves. So Muhammad Asad asserts the following. Contrary to popular view and practice of many Muslims in the past centuries, neither the Quran nor the life example of Prophet provides any sanction for sexual intercourse without marriage. 1. 2. As to the permission to marry more than one woman, the permission given is so restricted by the condition of fairness that it makes multiple marriages possible only in quite exceptional cases and under exceptional circumstances. Now, what do we mean by what can we say about the fairness? In speaking of multiple wives, by the way, as an additional comment, Surah An-Nisa, ayat 129 continues, it will not be within your power to treat your wives with equal fairness, however much you may desire it. And so, do not allow yourselves to be preferential towards one wife to the exclusion of other wives, since this will leave the other wives in a state of, as it were, having and not having the husband. So from the point of view of the other wives who are not being preferred over the ones that you are preferring, this puts these other women in a state of quandary. Well, is he my husband or is he not my husband? Why is he preferring this? What about my rights? This is stated in the Quran. Now, since a man who is fully conscious of his moral responsibility, okay, we are talking about that man who is fully conscious of his moral responsibility, he might feel that he is committing a sin if he loves one of his wives more than the others. This verse provides a judicial enlightenment on this point by making it clear. This particular verse makes it clear that feelings are beyond a human being's control. If you feel that you love one of your wives more than others, this is a feeling you have. It's beyond your control. The required treatment of equality, however, relates only to outward behavior and practical dealings with one's wives. This judicial treatment is being meted out in the Quran for how you relate to the outward behavior insofar as your wife is concerned, and how do you practically deal with your wives. It is not dealing, that particular dictate is not dealing with how you feel inside. You love one more than the others. There is no dictate here legally. Legally, there is no dictate. However, in this particular ayat, Allah Ta'ala is saying, it will not be within your power to treat your wives with equal fairness, however much you may desire. This is all it's saying about that. So that feeling is inside you. There is no legal dictate about what should I do with that feeling of mine. Mind you, this is very subtle but very profound, very important. In view of the fact that a man's behavior toward another person is, in the long run, almost inevitably influenced by how he or she feels about that person, verse 129, along with Surah Nisa, ayat 3, especially the concluding sentence of ayat 3, this will make it more likely that you will not deviate from the right course. It imposes a moral restriction of multiple marriages, not legal. Legally, for allowed. But what are you going to do about this possibility that you will not be fair to all of them equally, that you will love one more than the other? The Quran does not give you the solution for it. The Quran simply states, it will be very difficult for you to maintain fairness. And you say, well, I'm maintaining fairness as far as people are concerned. I'm giving them all the rights, but inside your heart, you are preferring one to the other. This is very profound. This choice, Allah Ta'ala has left to man himself. He has left this choice. He has given you the freedom to marry four. He has pointed out, however, that it's going to be very, very difficult to be fair to all of them equally. And so he said, but I am fair to all four of them. I am giving them all equally this and that. What about your inner feelings? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it to you. Now, I'll take one more step, and this is, again, all of this, any one of you can consider controversial. Of course, it has been controversial. Ultimately, I have to live with what I see, what I read, and how I interpret. Okay? The determinant biological reason for sexual urge in both sexes has genetically evolved only to be for procreation, to have children. This is agreed. Genetically, it's agreed that the reason for sexual urge in both sexes and thereby have the physical intercourse genetically was in order for you to have children, in order to have procreation. Now, a woman can at one time conceive a child from one man only and has to carry that child for 9 months before she can conceive another. And so nature would have been merely wasteful if nature had produced polygamous instinct in woman. Yeah, take today's environment. A woman is not married, a woman is sleeping with more than one man. But that is that woman's choice. This is what that woman has chosen to do. Biologically, she cannot procreate more than one child at a time. So what this is saying is that if that biological genetic had been embedded, it would have been wasteful. What is the point of that if the woman cannot have more than one child at a time? So it's kind of silly. A man can beget a child every time he cohabits with a woman. That justifies biologically man's polygamous inclination, since it is genetically embedded. Now look at this. We are saying here, it justifies biologically that a man feels polygamous inclination because it is genetically embedded. Why? Because you can beget a child every time you cohabit with the woman. Now, this is where the morality comes in. Why should I beget a child every time I cohabit with woman, meaning one time with this, one time with that, with that? This is where the moral imperative is for the man. He says, no, my religion, my morality says I shall only cohabit with a legally wedded wife of mine. He is thereby morally restricting this polygamous inclination in him that is there. This is religion at its best. There is an inclination, and you are holding back that inclination because your morality tells you that this is the right thing to do. And by the way, this is in spite of the fact that you can go out and do it. You can have as many kids as you want. What about the social construct of that consequence? What is consequently going to happen? What is going to happen with those children? So here is a morality aspect coming in very strongly for men. Granted that the biological factor is only one of the aspects of marital love. Obviously, you're married to another person. There is much more than the biological factor that you have in you. Nevertheless, you have to accept that the biological factor is a basic factor, and therefore it is decisive in the institution of marriage as such. In other words, you cannot ignore a biological factor as a part and parcel of a married life, obviously. But you recognize it for what it is. Man will have an inclination. He has the moral responsibility to hold back that inclination. A woman can go ahead and do what she would like to, what she does. Many women do it this time. But there, the children's aspect goes away. You know, she doesn't know who it was and how it was and what is going to happen to them because she's not married either to one or more than one. No, none of that. That is where this particular injunction is so important, both socially in terms of what happens to the children, what happens to the family, and morally. Now, with the wisdom that always takes human nature into account, Islamic law takes human nature into account. Islamic law undertakes no more than the safeguarding of socio-biological function of the marriage, which also includes taking care of the children. This Islamic law includes taking care of the children. It recognizes, that is the social aspect, it recognizes that there is a biological function there for man and a woman. It allows men to have more than one wife and not allowing a woman to have more than one husband at one time. Think about it. This is very deep, but you reflect it and view these things in that vein. I'm trying to make myself wholesome by facing up to these ayahs, by facing and broadening it and saying to myself, how can I do justice to this? Justice to my biological urge, justice to my morality, both as an individual, only I know what I have inside of me by way of feelings, and as a member of the social community that I'm part of. This is where the children, raising the children comes in. That said, all, there is still the spiritual factor of love which influences the relations between man and woman. Okay? There is raising of the children, there is the biological factor, there is multiple wives, yes, but the spiritual factor of love still is there, and it is bound to influence the relation between man and a woman. This spiritual issue of marriage, whereby internal feelings come into play, which is what I've elaborated upon, insofar as the external law of Quran goes, becomes therefore an imponderable. What do you mean by imponderable? How do I rationalize the law that is given to me, which is external, which is incumbent upon me, and how do I rationalize that along with the internal feelings that come into myself about either loving only one and not loving others and feeling sinful that I'm doing some crime. Why is it? How do I resolve this imponderableness? You do it is saying this spiritual issue of marriage is a test for Allah given freedom to humans to make the right moral choice. You internalize and you say, there is no way I'm going to be able to be fair to all four women. There is bound to be one thing or the other that is going to make me not do full justice. Ergo, therefore, I am choosing this and I'm going to elect to be married to one lawful wife. That solves my moral, that solves my moral quandary. I will take this as my Allah-given freedom to choose, and this is my right choice. So this is how I go and internalize and rationalize my internal feelings to be consistent and in line with the external law. If you don't, there's problem. As such, the spiritual issue of marriage is left to the discretion of the partners. This institution of marriage, how you render it whole and wholesome, ultimately is once again the choice He has given you. How you are going to deal with this issue of marriage is between you and your partner. Are you consistent in conformity with Allah's dictate as well as what is within you? And I'll leave it at that. Okay, Surah An-Nisa, ayat 34, part of it. This is on beating one's wife. And as for those wives whose ill will, okay, ill will is the translation that has been selected here for the word nushuz. And as for those wives whose ill will you have reason to fear, admonish, that is, caution them first, then leave them alone in bed, then beat them. The first and the second are two ways of progressively men showing dissatisfaction with the nushuz of the woman, with the ill will of the woman, with the way the woman is fulfilling her obligations. So this is, and the third stage is, it says, and then beat them. And then it says, if thereupon they pay you heed, that is, they pay attention to what you have said, what you have done, do not seek to harm them. After you have gone through these three steps, if thereupon they pay you heed, that is, they no longer commit that ill will, do not seek to harm them. Now, the term nushuz, literally, you can say rebellion. Here, we have translated it as ill will, in other words, by Muhammad Asad. This nushuz comprises every kind of deliberate bad behavior of a wife towards her husband or of a husband towards his wife, including mental cruelty. We are not talking about just beating men. Nushuz is any deliberate bad behavior, including mental cruelty. With reference to the husband, it also denotes ill treatment in the physical sense. Physical sense cruelty, mental cruelty, all kind of deliberate bad behavior. In the context of this verse, of course, nushuz implies a deliberate, persistent break of a woman's marital obligation, an ill will of a woman towards the obligation she has, of a wife that she has towards her husband. This is what this is referring to, this particular ayat. It is evident from many authentic traditions that the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself intensely detested the idea of beating one's wife and said in more than one occasion, could any of you beat your wife as you would, say, for your slave and then lie with her in the evening? What he's drawing the picture of, how can you beat this woman and then in the evening go and lie with her and show the most soulful intimacy that Allah Ta'ala has accorded a man and a lawful wife. How can you be in a mental state to be able to do this and do that in the same vein, in the same day, maybe in the same hour? Does it make sense? This particular rhetorical comment vis-a-vis this particular action, the Prophet tradition is saying, he's pointing this out to you in this way. Does it make sense to you? In 1450, it may have been very common that the slave may have been beaten, but that is not, he's not saying that beating the slave is right. He's saying these two acts of beating and making love, how are they consistent in your mind? How can you even do that? According to another tradition, the Prophet forbade the beating of any woman with the words, never beat Allah's handmaidens. Handmaidens is Allah's female servants. And I have pointing out here, and I'm not going to go through these, there are 9 or 10 references to the tradition on the authority of various, on the authority of Ilyas ibn Abdullah, on the authority of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and on the authority of Kulthum. Unequivocally, there is this in tradition, never beat Allah's handmaidens, said the Prophet. When the above Quranic verse authorizing the beating of a refractory wife is another way of saying the one who is not fulfilling the obligations and it is committing ill will as a result, the Prophet is reported to have said, I wanted one thing, but Allah has willed another thing, and what Allah has willed must be best. All that said, the Prophet stipulated in his sermon on the occasion of the farewell pilgrimage shortly before his death that beating should be resorted to only if the wife has become guilty in an obvious manner of immoral conduct, and that it should be done in such a way as not to cause pain. غير مبرح. Authentic traditions are found in Muslim, Tirmidhi, Abu Dawud, Nasai, and Ibn Majah. On the basis of these traditions, all the authorities stress that this beating, if resorted to at all, should be more or less symbolic. With a toothbrush or some such thing, Tabari quoting the views of scholars of earliest times, or even with a folded handkerchief, as reported by Razi, as interpreted by Razi. Some of the greatest Muslim scholars, for example, as Shafi, are of the opinion that it is just barely permissible and should preferably be avoided. They justify their opinion taking into consideration the Prophet's personal feelings with regard to this issue. Again, bringing it to my own self, this is how I would choose to understand it. This is how I choose to interpret it, and I'm peace with that. Okay. You, others, centuries ago, 100 years ago, today, may wish to go into any of these controversial matters in any way you are free to do. The choice is yours. You have to live with the choices you make, actual choices or moral choices or social choices. But I, as an individual, have to live with my Quran in the way I interpret, and these are very difficult times to interpret the Quran, whereby I'm able to do justice to the moral side as well as the social side that I have to live with and within and among. These two are expressions, Fahishaa and Zinna. Muhammad Asad translates Fahisha as immoral conduct and Zina as adultery. Now, I've deliberately chosen these two words. Meanwhile, some of the other commentators attribute to Fahisha the meaning of adultery or fornication. For those who don't know the difference, adultery is between two married, fornication is where one or both may be not married. So when when they attribute to Fahishaa the meaning of adultery or fornication, they claim that Surah Nisa, ayat 14, where the term Fahisha appears and which they render as adultery, has been abrogated by Surah An-Nur, ayat 2, where the term Zina appears and which the punishment of 100 stripes for each of the guilty parties' adulterers is laid down. Once you take that kind of an approach, abrogation, which is again an anathema, I'll talk about it for 1 minute. And number two, where now you've confused for an average reader, well, is it adultery or is it something else? That is immoral conduct as it has been translated here. Or can you just interchange each other? Muhammad Asad rejects unwarranted assumption of these commentators as to the abrogation of a Quranic verse, and also stated above, he renders fahisha differently from zina. Quite apart from the impossibility that any passage of the Quran could have been abrogated by another of its passages, the term fahisha does not by itself mean illicit sexual intercourse. It signifies anything that is grossly modest, unseemly, lewd, or indecent, or abominable in word or in deed, and is by no means restricted to sexual transgressions. In other words, fahisha is not illicit sexual intercourse, period. It is not restricted to sexual transgressions. In other words, anything that is morally reprehensible. That is what is fahisha. It must be therefore considered immoral conduct in the widest sense of this expression. So for example, in ayat 19 of Surah Nisa, the term refers to unfounded or unproven allegations. Fahisha there pertains to unfounded or unproven allegations of immoral conduct. In other words, over there, it was about foul slander. Fahisha, not as zina, fahisha, not adultery. Fahisha here is a part of an immoral conduct. In this particular place, it was foul slander. Now, read in the context of ayat 15 of Surah An-Nisa and in conjunction with ayat 2 of Al-Nur, the expression in fahisha obviously denotes immoral conduct, not necessarily amounting to what is termed zina, which is adultery or fornication. Because of that, the act of fahisha is therefore redeemable by sincere repentance. Fahisha, one can repent and it is redeemed. It is in contrast to a proven act of zina, which is punishable by flogging. Not all fahisha is punishable by flogging. It isn't. Zina per se is an act that is punishable by flogging. There has been confusion, and many crimes have been committed in the past 1400 years by way of confusion between these two. It is noteworthy that in all cases of alleged sexual transgressions or misbehavior, the Quran stipulates the direct evidence of 4 witnesses instead of 2 required in all other judicial cases as a sine qua non, which means indispensable condition of conviction. The term zina in Surah Al-Nur meanwhile signifies voluntary sexual intercourse between a man and a woman not married to one another, irrespective of whether one or both of them are married to other persons or not. Hence, it does not, in contrast with the usage prevalent in most Western languages, mind this, the term zina signifies voluntary sexual intercourse between a man and a woman not married to one another, irrespective of whether one or both of them are married to other persons or not. In most Western languages, they differentiate between the concept of adultery and fornication. They say, oh, well, it was between two, married men. Well, two married men and women, or two unmarried men and women, or one of them was married, the other one was unmarried. In Quran, plain and simple, zina is zina. Fornication, adultery, zina is zina. That is it. So in the Quran, adultery is fornication, is zina. That's it. When you say zina, you've incorporated all these various permutations and combinations. For the sake of simplicity, Asad therefore renders zina throughout as adultery, period, and the person guilty of it as adulterer or adulteress. Now, I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes, it'll give me 1 hour that I said to myself I have allowed. I took this last particular topic of Fahishaa and Zina and asked ChatGPT version 5.0, it just came out less than 1 month ago. That is the most advanced version. And according to Sam Altman, the founder of AI, OpenAI, this version gives you the expertise of somebody who's PhD in that particular area. But this one gives you the expertise of a PhD level expert in any and all areas. The power of this AI is equivalent to if the question answers and dialogues are correct and comprehensive, it's as if you have in your hand all PhD experts, no matter what subject matter you select. Okay, this is his understanding. This is how people have taken it, and if one uses it, hopefully it gives you that. So I took it as an exercise, and my purpose for that is for me to encourage you, go and use this, whether you use it for Quran, for Islam, for your children, for yourself, for your marriage, for any other subject that interests you, go and use its power. Now, look, I just went through this Fahisha and Zina in trying to differentiate between these two and in trying to say that there have been historical incidents where Zina, where stoning has been done, flogging, stoning, stoning and flogging, and or of those because they were Fahisha, not strictly zina, but fahisha of other kinds, any and all. So what was the question? In the Quran, two expressions appear several times, fahisha and zina. What is the difference between the two? And does the Quran spell out punishment for one or both of them in this world? On the next several exhibits, I'll go very quickly. I'll read them all. ChatGPT's concise yet comprehensive response is presented. Keep in mind the sensitivity of this response. It is sensitive that we are now talking about a religious matter. There are two terms in the Quran. All these 1A and dash and bullets, all of it is as per ChatGPT, okay? I've just made it so that it reads exactly the same way the others read. There are two terms in the Quran. We'll first discuss fahisha. Literal sense, something grossly obscene, shameful, or morally outrageous. That's the literal sense. Usage in Quran, it is a broad category of grave indecencies, not limited to sexual acts. Example, general acts of immorality. Do not go near shameful acts, whether open or hidden. 2 ayat given. Sexual transgressions in particular, do not approach unlawful sexual relations, al-fawahish. 3, homosexual acts of loose people are called fahisha. Zina itself is also sometimes described as fahisha. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ayat given as examples of usage in Quran, which is a broad category of grave indecencies, not limited to sexual acts, literally something that is grossly obscene, shameful, or morally outrageous. You will note here, he's not confusing fahisha exclusively with zina. He's saying zina itself is also sometimes described as fahisha. One of the fahisha is zina, but not all zina, all fahisha is zina. He points out very clearly. So, and this is say, so fahisha is an umbrella term for gross indecencies, sexual or otherwise, while zina is a specific legal offense within that category. Legal specific offense within that category. Zina, B, literal sense, illicit sexual intercourse outside a lawful marriage bond, period. Look at it, how crisp and comprehensive it is. Illegal, illicit sexual intercourse outside a lawful marriage bond. Muslim lawful marriage bond, perform a contract in front of witnesses, and the rest is up to you, men and women, legally married. Okay? Sexual intercourse allowed. Anything else, any combination other than that, not allowed. All there is, this is what zina is. Says it. This is ChatGPT now saying this is the literal sense of zina as per the Quran, it says. Usage in the Quran. The Quran is precise about zina. Example, do not come near zina, for it is an abomination and an evil way. Legal punishments are detailed in Ayat 2 of Surah Nur and related verses. Thus, I'm saying, no, I'm not saying this is ChatGPT saying, thus, zina is one of the most specific and punishable forms of fahisha. Within the umbrella, zina is that. Punishments mentioned in the Quran. A, for zina, explicit worldly punishment. The woman and man guilty of zina flog each one of them with 100 stripes. That is all yet another subject to discuss. We are not discussing that. This applies to fornicators, not married. See, here it says, lest you think that it is only applicable to the ones who are married. No, this is also applicable to fornicators. For married adulterers, the Quran itself does not explicitly mention stoning. That punishment is derived from hadith and classical juristic consensus, not directly from the Quran. I never said that, right, in that, my talk. He's pointing it out. This is pointing it out. Related procedure, Surah Al-Nur, ayat 4 through 9, gives rules about witnesses, slander, and the procedure of li'an, which is mutual implication. He said, she said, in accusations of zina. For fahisha in general, punishment. No single prescribed legal punishment in this world is tied to the generic word fahisha. Sometimes Quran prescribes moral condemnation, community disapproval, or spiritual warning rather than corporal punishment, physical punishment. Sometimes it prescribes those things. For example, ayat 15-16 in Surah An-Nisa. Early Medina context mentions confining women guilty of fahisha in houses or giving some form of social reprimand. Most exegetes hold this was later abrogated by the clear legal ruling in Surah An-Nur, ayat 2. Many fawahish, i.e. arrogance, unjust killing, indecent speech, are condemned in Quran, but they are left to divine punishment in the hereafter rather than worldly law. Summary of distinction between the two. Fahisha equals broad moral category of indecent, shameful acts, sexual or otherwise. It is descriptive, not always tied to a legal penalty. Zina, a specific legal offense, both for fornication and adultery. The Quran explicitly prescribes a worldly punishment, 100 lashes for unmarried offenders, plus procedural safeguard. And so, this is again, ChatGPT ends here. The Quran prescribes clearly worldly punishment for zina. The fahisha as a general category, for fahisha as a general category, the Quran condemns it strongly, but worldly punishment is not consistently specified except where zina is one form of it. This is what I got in less than a minute. In this format, I have not added word, I have not subtracted a word. Just reflect about it, okay? I've given you what I may have spent a lot of time before culling from the Quran about fahisha and zina, and then I gave it the way I gave it. I could have given it in this fashion, one of the presentations in my 40 years of work. This is how I did my presentations, as ChatGPT does. But I did the way I did in the 9 of Quran, according to what my intellect told me and what I had available. Here is an instrument available free of cost, free of your time. You use it the way you want to use it, but do not ignore it. Do not throw it out of your hand. This is the only thing I'm telling you about ChatGPT. And I thought it was pertinent because I thought this would be a good example. Here is somebody who has looked at this, looked at that, and I said, now I can take what I had done, and in light of this, I can make that a richer exercise. I have now finally, first time in my life, something here that enhances what I thought I could do the best. I can now enhance it and verify it. It's verifiable. Allahumma salli wa sallam wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi ashabihi ajma'in. Ya Allah, spread your mercy upon this gathering. Shower us with your blessings, increase our knowledge, grant us your forgiveness, and reward us by the company of your prophets in the highest place in heaven. Al-Firdaus al-Ala. Ya Allah, purify our hearts, strengthen our faith, increase our knowledge, and make us benefit from all that you have taught us. Ya Allah, remedy our sick, forgive our parents and all the believers, and render their graves gardens from heaven. Ya Allah, guide our children, protect them, and make them righteous. Ya Allah, accept our repentance, wash away our sins, answer our supplications, and guide our hearts. O Allah, we seek from you all the good, whether we know it or we don't. We seek your refuge from all the evil, whether we know it or we don't of it. Ya Allah, we seek refuge in you from incapacity, from laziness, from fear, from greed, from poverty, and from the torment of the grave. Ya Allah, we ask with every name you have elected for yourself that none of us leave this gathering except that his pains are relieved, his worries are removed, his debts are paid, his weaknesses are concealed, his sins are forgiven, and his needs are fulfilled. وَلَسَ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.